this verse. You can't do it verse by verse because we'd be here forever on each of these. And then there also be a lot of repetition. And so again, I just picked out some that I think are kind of typical examples. And I encourage you to be reading Proverbs as a regular part of your reading, because what I find is that each time that I read through Proverbs or read sections of Proverbs, that a different one or two or three jump out at me. Why? Because different circumstances in life, different situations call for looking at different things. And there are some of those that are like that in this passage today. And but also the variety, the great variety of topics there are. Some of these are some that we'll look at here. So let's start at chapter 24, verses 5 and 6. A wise man, this 24, chapter 24, a wise man is strong. Yes, a man of knowledge increases strength. For by wise counsel you will wage your own war. Remember, many of these were written to the kings. For by wise counsel you will wage your own war, and in a multitude of counselors there is safety. I just was interested in this one because it's speaking about war. And, whether it's literal war or metaphorical war, I don't know. But probably more of a literal war if it's speaking to Solomon and other kings, other great leaders, generals, and so on, but it's talking about wisdom. That wisdom is where your strength comes from. It's a little odd, isn't it? Because most time when we think of strength, we think of physical strength. But this is the strength that wisdom provides and knowledge provides. A man of knowledge increases strength. So he's speaking here in the sense of mental wisdom or mental acuity, of wisdom in the sense of what we think and how we think and what we think about, and then how we implement that in obeying the Lord. So it's important that a king be able to do that. It says at the very end, and in a multitude of counselors there is safety. A wise king would seek counsel of his generals and others that were involved in the process of making war in those days, and he would listen to what they have to say, because it isn't just the king that's involved, but there's lots of factors involved in waging war. And so it's interesting that I thought that it was interesting that a proverb about waging war would be here, and it's connected with wisdom, and that again shows that for the king, wisdom involves lots and lots and lots of things as he deals with all the problems that the world brings upon a nation. You remember, how wise Solomon was, and some of the decisions that he made were, and later on he was not so wise, and he didn't listen to his counselors, and he became, he really did get away from the Lord in that. But seeking a multitude of counselors is a good thing in any major decision. That's why we have elders and deacons, and not elder and deacon only, just one of each. We have elders because there's wisdom. Even if you've got a wise pastor like ours, still there are times when you just don't think of everything. You can't think of everything. There may be factors you're not aware of, and others that can counsel you and help you are a help to you. And that's true in all of life. It's not just waging war, but it's true for all of life. And so we need to be willing to listen to others. A wise person is a person that listens. You find often in these proverbs that a fool is somebody who won't listen to anybody. He knows everything already. He's wise in his own eyes. We'll come to that one in a few minutes. In fact, in the next few verses we'll be looking at. So, wise counselors in time of war, but wise counselors in all kinds of situations are helpful. So we need to pay attention to others and listen to others. And sometimes it has to do with the topic or subject that we're dealing with or the issue that we're dealing with. You know, you just can't know everything. I used to have people come to me when I was teaching New Testament, people that I thought were just brilliant, and they would come, well, I don't understand this particular thing, and could you help me with that? And I would try to do that. And then the opposite, I would go to them when I needed help with something that I didn't understand or didn't remember. We had one missionary that had a phenomenal memory. It wasn't a photographic memory, it was more like a tape recorder memory. He could remember everything that was ever said in a meeting. You could go, he died just a couple of years ago, a good friend, you could go to him and ask him what happened in a meeting 12 years ago, and he would tell you, so-and-so said so-and-so, so-and-so responded, then they responded back, and then the discussion went like this, and the decision was, and it would be just word for word accurate. I couldn't remember what happened in the meeting last week, let alone the one that took 10 years ago. All right, so those kinds of counselors, people like that, can be very helpful sometimes when you're seeking a path to walk before the Lord. Look at verse 10 then for a moment. It may not be obvious what this means at first. If you faint in the day of adversity, your strength is small. If you faint, have you ever fainted? I only fainted once. I was in a military formation once. We were standing out on the tarmac in the days like we had this last week, 103, 104. We had some general that was supposed to come and do an inspection when I was in flight school. And they had the entire, all of the pilots, the pilots in training, and plus all the instructors and everybody. We were out there in formation in dress white uniforms. You know, those Marine uniforms that come up your neck and they choke you like that. And it was hot. And they always warned us, don't lock your knees. You know, you've got to kind of bend your knees when you're standing there. We were out there for more than 2 hours, and I don't know how long they stood there, because I didn't intend to, but I locked my knees. Fortunately, the guy behind me caught me before I hit the ground. But that was the end of that formation for me. That I had to go to the clinic to check me out, see if I was all right. So anyway, fainting, no fun. But if you faint on the day of adversity, in other words, on a day of crisis, a day when things are going badly, when there's maybe hostility, and your strength is small. In other words, your character is revealed, or your strength is revealed when there's a crisis. You have a crisis in your life, and it's on those days you find out what kind of strength you really got. He's not advocating this, but yes.
Can you use strength, parenthesis, faith?
Well, faith would certainly be part of that, yes. I think a lot of different words could be used here. On a day of adversity, you know, your faith might be small too. If you faint, your faith is small. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things.
A lot of other words.
And you could reverse it with something like, you know, in a positive sense, if you fear, and you know, and that kind of thing. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways of putting it. And I'm sure that there are other proverbs that would show the same kind of things, only with different qualities. But when you're tested is when you know whether your strength is good or your knowledge is right. You know, it could be knowledge too. Faith, hope, love. Your love is tested. Any of those things. Yeah.
The
banner just behind you says, "Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength."
Yes, well, yeah, that's right. I planned that. No, I didn't never even thought about it. Thank you, Holly. Yes, that's a similar thing, isn't it? If you on when there's a crisis, when there's adversity, when there's big problems, when something bad happens to you, that's when you find out how much strength you've got, how much faith you've got, how much love you've got, and so on. Yeah. So I thought that was, for just being a little one, that was significant. Yes, Bud?
Isn't that why when you go through Proverbs, you find something new almost every time?
Yes. Yes. And again, it depends on your situation in life. Sometimes you read scripture and you've read a passage over and over and over many times, and then all of a sudden something will happen in your life or some crisis will come about, and all of a sudden a passage of scripture that you've known, but you hadn't applied it to this kind of a situation, and all of a sudden it becomes extremely meaningful to you because of the circumstances that you're in. And it wasn't that it wasn't there before; it was there before, but you just didn't apply it to that one. It didn't occur to you because of that situation brought it about. And I think that happens all the time in the scriptures. I know when you read the epistles of Paul, and you're a pastor or a missionary or deeply involved in church work, and you see some of the crises he went through and stuff that he faced. I remember that. I think it's in 2 Corinthians 11, maybe 10. Pastor will know. Right. Don't say yes or no. But Paul talks about all of the crises that he had faced, one after the other, and most of which are not even recorded in the book of Acts. They're not recorded in his epistles. He was shipwrecked and beaten and numerous times and all kinds of things that happened to him. And then you get to the very last thing in that list, and he says, on top of all that is my daily concern for the churches. That never really struck me, that last part, until we were in a huge crisis in Ghana, and the convention split, and we were having all kinds of problems, doctrinal problems, and other kinds of problems, and the convention itself split, and the mission was on one side. And anyway, it went on for years, and it was a major crisis for the Baptists in Ghana that 3 or 4 years. And that passage about on top of that, all my daily concern for the churches, it had never really hit me until all these churches that I had been working with, the pastors that I had been working with, and all of a sudden there's these great difficulties. And that passage really meant something. But yeah, Paul was concerned for all of those churches. It was a crisis, and it brought forth that concern and that issue. So yes, but it just depends on the circumstances. And Proverbs is so full, and there are so many of them, and stated in so many different ways. Sometimes the same problem is looked at different angles, and you can just get a lot. That's why I suggested several times already that you read Proverbs 2 or 3 a day. Just meditate upon them a little bit, alongside reading other things. I think Psalms is the same way in a lot of ways. That you read a psalm today and you meditate upon it and you think about it and you see things there that you just didn't see before. All of Scripture is that way to a certain extent, but these little pithy proverbs that are just short and to the point and speak to primarily one issue can be very helpful to have in your mind and in your heart. Look at verse 17 and 18 for a moment. Chapter 24. Now this one can hit home, maybe. Do not rejoice when your enemy falls. Do not let your heart be glad when he stumbles. Lest the Lord see it, and it displeases him, and he turn away his wrath from him. Have you ever rejoice to see your enemy fall? Everybody in here ought to probably raise their hand at some point. Somebody's done something really bad to us, and it's just hard not to. Finally, he's getting his, or something, when something happened to somebody and they deserved it, and you rejoice in it. The Lord doesn't want you to do that. Even when an enemy falls, He doesn't want us to do that. He doesn't want us to rejoice in bad things, in evil things, even when there is justice in what happens. Why? Because it is the Lord that's doing it. It's obvious. And turn away His wrath, because it's saying that His wrath was on Him, and what was happening to Him was from the Lord. But we're not to rejoice when other people are in turmoil and trouble and difficulty. Okay? Don't let your heart be glad when somebody else stumbles. That's not the way we ought to be. We ought to actually love our enemies. That's where we have to understand what real biblical love is, but that goes beyond what we're talking about here. But the reason you don't do that as a Christian is because we're to love our enemies. And that means basically to seek good for them, to try to find the good, do good, even for those that we know are our enemies. We pray for them. We may feed them when they're hungry, give them water when they're thirsty, and so on. We're to love our enemies, even though they really are enemies. It is naive to think, really naive to think that we don't have enemies. So I've heard people say that, well, I really don't have any enemies. Well, you just haven't been around in the world long enough, then you don't know that. Because all of us have enemies simply because we're Christians. It's becoming more and more obvious in our country all the time that there's a lot of anti-Christian stuff. At the very end of chapter 25, 24, beginning at verse 30, this is one of those sections, little section, paragraph or so, that is talking about one issue. I went by the field of the lazy man, and by the vineyard of the man devoid of understanding. When he's talking about lazy here, he's not talking about just physical laziness, although that's included. He's talking about not being wise kind of lazy. Okay? And by the vineyard of the man devoid of understanding. And there it was, the field. There it was, all overgrown with thorns. Its surface was covered with nettles. Its stone wall was broken down. Kind of reminds me of that little plot of land right out here in front of this subdivision over here as we drove by there this morning. You notice all the weeds and what that's looking like? Nobody's taking care of it. It was nice when they first built it, but it looked like a mess now. Well, that's kind of what he's describing. Going by somebody's farm or a field, and there it is. It's overgrown with stuff. In other words, he's not taking care of it at all. Its surface is covered with nettles. The stone wall was broken down. In those days, they built stone walls. It was a rocky country. They built stone walls around a lot of the fields and stuff. And it was to keep the animals out from the goats and sheep and other animals, the grazing animals out where they could, to keep them from getting into them, or just to make boundaries and keep other people from getting into them, and so on. And when I saw it, I considered it well. I looked upon it and I received instruction. Okay? So you go by this place and you don't have to ponder very long. You know that somebody that's responsible, that's not taking care of it, not doing what they ought. Why? Because the guy's lazy. He's a lazy man. This is a theme found frequently in the Book of Proverbs. Is the lazy and the fool go together. He's not a man that's wise. That doesn't have understanding. And then he says, and I looked on it, on that field. He looked at that field and he received instruction. You see, a wise person learns by observation. Not just reading the scriptures, as important as that is. And this isn't taking away from that at all. But we also learn by observation of the world. And so he watched this field, looked at this field, He thought about it. What instruction did he receive? Well, in verse 33, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. So shall your poverty come like a prowler, and your need like an armed man that's going to sneak up on you and it's going to destroy you like a prowler would do, or an armed robber would come and do. Because that little sleep, that little slumber, holding your hands and not doing any work, sitting in your chair in the afternoon when it's hot, not doing anything, that is going to bring destruction upon you. That's what he learned from that field. Looking at that field. The man that owns it is lazy. He sleeps too long, he sleeps too much, he sits when he should be working. And the result is the destruction of that field and perhaps the destruction of his very life. So that's a constant theme in the Book of Proverbs, is laziness. The Book of Proverbs teaches us to be industrious. That's one of the things that I think, along with a host of other things, but one of the things that makes Proverbs such a relevant book in all of life, all the time, all of these things, because they speak to basic, fundamental human issues. Laziness is one of them. Look at verse 25, chapter 25, verse 2. I found this one, it just really struck me this morning when I was looking at this one. I've been reading these Proverbs over and over and over for months now, as I've been telling you to do. And this one really appeals to me. I think it's got a really important message. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. But the glory of kings is to search out a matter. Why is it the glory of God to conceal a matter or to conceal things? You think?
He tells us what he wants us to know. And if he doesn't tell us, or it's not in his word, apparently it's not important enough from him that we know it, because he's giving us other instructions.
Okay, I'm going to give you an A for that answer.
Oh, thank you.
That's a good answer. God knows everything. God is omniscient. He sees everything. Omnipresent. He's everywhere. And omniscient, he knows everything. He knows everything. He sees everything. And if we get to the point where we think that we know everything that God knows, that makes us equivalent to God, and that is never going to happen. So there is much that God knows that is concealed that perhaps we will never be able to understand. Have you ever thought about, when you're with the Lord, whether we're talking in the end times or we're talking just now when we're going to be with the Lord? Did you ever wonder what kind of questions you would have for the Lord to ask him, or to ask one of the apostles or something? Did you ever wondered about that? Well, we can't know that now, but we'll know that when we get to heaven, kind of thing. I used to think that there'd be all kinds of questions. Lord, why did you allow this to happen to a loved one? Why did you permit or cause? Permit's a little softer, but cause is really what we're asking. Why did you cause this thing to happen, like World War II? Why did you do that instead of stopping? And I've come to the conclusion in my old age that when I get to heaven, I'm not going to care about all those questions much anymore. I'm not going to be asking them anymore. Now, Pastor and I may have a little seminar up there and be asking Paul about some stuff that he wrote, Romans, that he's been trying to teach all these years and don't understand exactly. what did you mean? He's going to straighten all of us out about our millennial views and all that stuff. And I have a sneaky suspicion all of us are going to have been wrong about a lot of stuff. That we're going to add. Because God knows everything. And so it's His glory not to reveal except what He wants us to know. There's, you can read through the scriptures and over and over and over, you come to some really fundamental questions. Cain and Abel. Where did Cain get his wife? Where'd she come from? There's two people that have been created. They had children, and now Cain is getting married somebody from another place. How did that happen? I mean, from 2 verses, we're talking about a populated world. Well, the Lord didn't tell us. He didn't tell us. He didn't tell us how all that. He didn't tell us how much time was in between those two things, and so on and so on and so on. We can ask a lot of questions for which there is no answer now. Maybe there will be in the future, but who knows? But it's the glory of God to know those things and to keep them secret. They're His secrets. We've been talking a lot. Just a minute. We've been talking a lot. The pastor has about mysteries in Colossians. A mystery is something that was unknown but has now been revealed by the Lord. Well, there are oodles of mysteries that God knows that we will never know, maybe never could know, never could understand. It's just beyond human intellect, even a redeemed intellect. Who knows? Yes.
I was thinking about this. There's a poem by E.E. Cummings about heaven, and it says that basically when a person gets to heaven, it is yes, and yes is capitalized, as in everything that needs to be known is known. And, I mean, it's the Lord. Yes, that's it.
Yeah, everything is yes in Christ, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Moses wrote in Deuteronomy that the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but those things that are revealed belong to us and our children forever, that we may do the words of the law. So God has revealed to us everything that we need to know in order to do His will. Questioning God about other things, sort of like what Job did. The Lord answered him and said, "Who are you to question me? Right? I will question you," the Lord said to Job.
And then He does.
Yes.
Were you there when?
Yes. So the Lord has given us all that we need to know. And if we need to know more later, He'll let us know more.
And a lot of that we need to know is here in Proverbs.
Yeah.
Of living daily life, of getting along or not getting along, or getting along with hard to get along with people, and so on, all those kinds of things. And plus all the doctrinal things, all the great things that are revealed in the New Testament as well.
But it's a wonderful thing to search those things out. I think that's the second part of that verse, right? I mean, It's a glorious thing for kings, for wise men to seek knowledge, to seek out God's wisdom, and to seek to understand what God has revealed.
And we should be seeking it up to the point that the Lord has revealed it and be satisfied. When we get to a point where you just have to say, the Lord has not revealed this to us. And there's lots of things like that, actually, that you come up to the end of everything, you study everything that you can find about what the Lord has revealed. Say about election and predestination and all those kind of, it's a famous problem. And people struggle. How do human beings maintain any kind of responsibility if we're elected and predestined and brought to salvation by the work of the Lord and all that? How do we remain responsible? Well, the answer is, I don't know and you don't know, but the Lord knows. But we know that both things are true. We are responsible for our actions. We are responsible for our choices. We are responsible to believe, and yet the Lord is behind it. Without Him being behind it, without Him opening our hearts, we couldn't believe, and so on. You run into problems like that all the time. How can Christ be both God and man at the same time? How can that be? What is the nature of the Trinity? I mean, there's just one, these are some of the really big ones, but there's just one problem like after another like that you get up to a certain place and you can't go any farther. Why? Because it hasn't been revealed. And Pastor's absolutely right. We do not need to know what has not been revealed yet. We may need to know it, and when we need to know it, then the Lord will reveal it. But up until that point, He won't. He's told us what we need to know. And if He hasn't told us, then we don't need to know. And we should be satisfied with that. It doesn't stop our curiosity. It doesn't stop scholars from asking questions, or us from asking questions. Well, what about the second part of that verse 2 and 25? But the glory of kings is to search out a matter. Now, the kings have great authority too. God, of course, has absolute authority. But the kings have great authority, especially the kings that God has appointed and put in place over His people. What is it? Why do kings need to search out a matter? God's glory is keeping things secret. The king's glory is to find out things, to find out secrets. What do you think?
Know how to rule.
Yeah, he needs to know how to rule. He needs to know, things about economics. They didn't use that word in those days, but the prosperity of the nation is in his hands. The military things, war is in his hands. Judging cases is in his hands ultimately over people and the problems that they have and so on. And he needs to be one that searches for answers and looks for answers and tries to find the truth of things, the truth of God. One of the places that a wise king would look would be right here in this book. This book is intended to teach leaders and kings and everybody the ways of God and the way that we are to be living in our daily life, pleasing to God because of these many wise sayings that He has incorporated into His scriptures. And so we learn about something about kings and the difference between God and kings here. God knows everything. The kings don't know anything, and they have to find out. Relatively. Yes.
Why don't we go back to 24:21, which talks about do not associate with those who are given to change. Well, I'm sure other people here have ideas of somebody they know that is like that, but that became conscious to me when Obama was trying to become our president, and the people raised their hands and they were saying, "We want change, we want change," Well, they got change.
Yeah.
And so, that kind of, we should associate with Obama because he wanted change, but how do you think that can be applied?
Well, notice it says, "my son," at the beginning. So it's, again, wisdom being passed on from a father to a son, maybe from God to the king. "My son, fear the Lord and the king," in that order, of course. Fear the Lord, fear Yahweh, and fear the king. Why the king? Because the king has been put there by the Lord. All right? So we got to understand that's the context. And most of the time in Proverbs, there's not any context. But in this one, this first line is the context for the second line that you were asked. Do not associate those given to change. One of the things that so disgusted me when I first went to seminary was so much of what scholars have done is to try to understand things that are not understandable and change our perception of things. Now, when you're talking about a political change here, or a change, what does God really want? Well, we're going to change that. I mean, I think it's pretty clear, isn't it, that in the Bible there are two sexes. Well, Mr. Tallarico in Texas says there's 6, and some other people says there's more than that. I don't know. Well, I don't want to get into that anymore. That's enough of that. But
another way that that's translated is don't join with those who are rebellious.
yes,
So
yes, it's what this is talking about is instituting political change here. That's the primary thing it's talking about. Don't revolt against God. Don't revolt against the king. Don't change how you worship God. It's okay to worship God in the temple, and it's okay to them to go down over to the next hill and worship Baal, say, which many Israelites in the early days were doing. Don't change the king because you don't like what the king is doing right at this moment. Don't question God's authority given to the king, and so on. So they're looking for changing political institutions primarily. But, as with so many of these proverbs, they can apply to a lot of different kinds of change, I suppose. But I find that this isn't opposing change when we're talking about changing, what crop we're going to put in the field this year. It's not talking about that kind of change. It's talking about major change that has to do with our relationship with God, our relationship with the political system. Don't be people who are rebellious and seek change for the sake of change, thinking that you can make a change in what God has commanded and you're going to do better. When Israel was formed, it was a theocracy. That is, it was ruled by God. Israel had no king. But what did they want? We want a king like all the other nations. We want to change the political system. We're not happy being ruled by you. We need a king like the other nations have. And the Lord said, okay, you're going to get one. And here's what he's going to do. We still want him. So they did, and they got done what he said was going to happen.
well, even in the political realm, I think, there's a difference between desiring change and working within the system to promote that change. So, we can vote for someone that we would think might make things better, or we can even promote a candidate or a cause or something like that within the system that we have within the legitimate means. But then there's a whole different thing to promote anarchy and rebellion and those kind of things that just is wanting to just wipe out the whole system and turn everything over. I think there's a big difference there.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you're familiar with this DSA group, Democratic Socialists of America. They want to abolish the Senate, abolish the Supreme Court, do away with the Electoral College, do away with police forces, do away with the military. That's actually in their statements, their own documents. And I'm just listening to some of them. I don't remember all of them, but there's a bunch of things like, well, that is revolution. That is completely overturning the system. Well, that could illustrate the kind of thing the pastor's talking about. That seeking that kind of change that is totally destructive. Close all the prisons. I remember that one too. That was another one. All those kinds of things that. Can you just imagine what the world would be like with no police?
Verse 22, their calamity will arise suddenly.
Yeah.
Who knows the ruin it'll bring, right?
Yeah. And it'll be really sudden too. The day the police out there, guess what happened? You think the Russians and the Chinese are going to sit on their tails and do nothing if we have no military? Yes.
When Satan gets to have the authority, oh boy. That's it.
Oh, there'll be police.
The epitome of
There'll be police and there'll be a military. You ever heard of the Red Army? So, yeah, it's nuts. And that's the kind of change of destructive change and revolutionary change, that perhaps that might be an illustration of what but that one struck you, and that's good. Read these, think about them, apply them, and
A lot of the young people who are Buddhists, who are riding in the streets, they have no concept of what communism really is.
I know.
They think, or socialism, they think that it means being social. I heard a young man on TV say that. Well, we all get along.
I asked, one day I was talking with one of my daughters, and she said, well, Dad, there's nothing wrong with socialism. All socialism means is being kind to your neighbor. I refrained because of past experience from saying, well, you idiot. That's what I was thinking. You ignorant idiot. You don't have the slightest idea what you're talking about. It shocked her a little when I said to her also, I spent a year in Vietnam fighting communism. We thought we were doing the right thing, whether or not it was, with what we thought we were doing was stopping the spread of communism in Asia. And so, yeah, there's probably all kinds of applications to this kind of thing. But one last one before we go today, and that's in verse 17. This one's pretty simple, I think. Seldom set foot in your neighbor's house. 25:17. Seldom set foot in your neighbor's house, lest he become weary of you and hate you. Don't bother your neighbors overly much.
Don't make a nuisance of
Don't
yourself.
make a nuisance of yourself. Because you know what it's like when they make a nuisance of you. So there we go. All right, we'll stop there for today. Next week, I would like you to look at the very end of Proverbs in chapter 31, the long teaching there about the virtuous woman, the honorable woman, the noble woman. Okay? We'll look at that. I've got a whole long list of others that I've been looked at today, but we didn't get to. I never know how fast this is going to go. But I appreciate asking about the other Proverbs, verse 21. All right, let's pray together. Bill, could I ask you to lead us in prayer, please?
Heavenly Father, we're grateful for the word we can give. Lead us and guide us to knowing and understanding. Yes, to learn, apply, to guide us home, to be with pastors,